From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, President Trump's deal-making diplomacy takes flight.
Kelly's telling me from Boeing it's the largest order of jets in the history of Boeing. That's pretty good. That's fantastic. So that's a record, Kelly. And congratulations to Boeing. Get those planes out there. Get them out there.
Following a welcome in Doha, complete with camels, fighter jets, and sword-wielding dancers, the president sought to employ a business-first approach to deepen ties with Qatari officials. The White House tonight celebrating several billion-dollar investments were in Qatar, with a report on what was inked and the fine print behind those deals.
Plus, with Ukraine and Russia set to meet for peace talks just hours from now, how Volodymyr Zelensky is pushing for Putin to meet face-to-face and end the war, the U.S.'s role in the discussions, and more when former Undersecretary Jen Gavito joins us.
And it's President Trump's big, beautiful bill or bust for some Republicans. The ongoing fight on the Hill over the particulars of the GOP tax bill ahead, the hours of meetings behind the scenes, and the 26-hour-long committee hearing that resulted in advancing Republicans' planned cuts to Medicaid, the jockeying for change, and Republican holdouts complicating matters as Democrats stand ready to deliver a hard no on the entire thing.
This isn't about helping people find good-paying jobs or a shot at a better life. This is simply about helping people like Elon Musk pay less in taxes.
And that's where we begin tonight, here in D.C. and on Capitol Hill, as House Republicans work through the key sticking points in the budget reconciliation package. The House Energy and Commerce Committee just finishing a 26-hour-long markup, advancing its plan for Medicaid cuts towards a full floor vote. The Ways and Means Committee also passed its tax bill earlier today along party lines without resolving one big outstanding issue: the SALT cap.
And for more on where that stands, we go to Congressman Blake Moore, a representative from Utah, member of the important House Ways and Means Committee. He's also vice chair of the House Republican Conference. Congressman, welcome. A lot of Americans know who you are today because of the all-nighter you pulled in the committee room, and I know you were fighting sleep in the wee hours this morning. Now that you've got this night and this legislation, the committee passing this bill under your belt, how do you reconcile what was done today in terms of no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, with the need to raise the SALT cap? How do you pay for it all?
That's the $1 million or billion or even $1 trillion question, actually, at this point. We have spent over the course of the last year identifying and looking through all of the tax provisions from 2017 that were important. And I don't want that to get lost in this conversation. We made so much of that permanent that has been strongly pro-growth, pro-family. It's a significant win. We made a lot of those tax provisions permanent. Then there was a whole slew of new things that President Trump wanted to incorporate. We did where we could, not everything that the administration wanted, but we definitely worked closely to get it to a point where we could be a part of this, because there is restraints. We have to have deficit neutrality and fiscal restraint here. R&D tax credit thing, or expensing, those things are huge and huge wins. The SALT piece remains, and that's going to be an ongoing discussion as that moves to the House floor. You have, 5 or 6 specific members from districts that this is a very sticky issue and political issue for them, and they're going to get a chance to work with the Speaker and as we advance this onto, House floor legislation. We got it out of committee last night, and then we're on to the next. You got to find a sweet spot, and hopefully we can do that.
Well, when we consider that sweet spot, Congressman, what are you hearing from your colleagues as to where exactly that could be, knowing there is theoretically wiggle room within the window or the range at which the loss of revenue could be seen in this package over 10 years that Ways and Means had to work with? Why not have had it higher from the jump to appease those members who risk potentially blowing up this entire thing?
You have to remember, so in 2017, we doubled the standard deduction. That was a significant tax break to a lot of middle-income, lower-income Americans. Almost, across the country, upwards to 90% of people actually take the standard deduction. And that changes the calculus a little bit because it is such a good tax benefit. Even if you would have otherwise liked to use SALT, it's still very good. And so we tripled the current cap. that is anytime you triple anything, when you're talking those types of numbers, that is a significant increase in the SALT cap. Some don't think that it's enough. Some want to get involved in making sure that the marriage penalty, making it instead of it being 30 cap, that would be considered 30/60. Or moving it to 40/80. There's all sorts of talk about this. Then there's also the alternative minimum tax that comes into play. That would be another force that you have to reckon with, because if you increase the SALT cap, you do have to recognize that alternative minimum tax is a thing, and you have to be able to deal with that. And then the timeline of it. So does it go for 10 years? Does it go for 5 years? What are the dials there that you could do? So there is a lot of variables you can adjust here. Again, it's going to go back to finding that sweet spot. We have to pass this bill with near unanimous support from Republicans. And if we don't have that, we won't have a really important tax bill, because at the end of this year, taxes will increase for every single American if we don't get this bill done.
Well, before then, of course, you need to deal with the debt limit, Congressman, and there is a thought that could, in fact, be what pushes this over the line. The Bipartisan Policy Center just yesterday out with its range for an X date likely to arrive between August and early October. If it lands on the early end and you have to put the debt limit in reconciliation, is that the urgency you need to get a final vote?
I love that you actually brought that up, because I've talked to a lot of people about that. Sometimes I've been in Congress. This is my 5th year. Oftentimes you need a bit of a crisis to get something done. I hope we don't get to that point. I hope we're well before August that we can finalize this bill. And the plan is to be done well before that. If we can have this out of the House before Memorial Day, I get that's going to be tough. But if we can do it, then we won't have to worry about that X date. I think the Senate can finish it well in time before that potential X date comes out.
But what Senate changes are you prepared for, Congressman, considering... I apologize for interrupting, but some members of the Republican Party in the Senate have issues with the level of spending cuts here, questions around the repealing of subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act. How different could this bill be if you can get it out of the House when the Senate sends it back to you afterward?
Some folks don't think we cut enough from the Inflation Reduction Act. Some might think we put too much on the chopping block. Again, we found a really, really real strong medium point that we could all agree with and say, hey, we're going to end these at some point, but some need a longer runway than others, and let's find. So those conversations will happen in the Senate. I'm not, no one's, bearing their head on that concept. They will have their time to work through this. But I think this framework, this bill that we sent them, is going to be a really good proposal for them to say, hey, they took a balanced approach. It's a little too much for some, not enough for others, and we found the sweet spot. And hopefully we can get that recognized in the Senate fairly quickly.
All right, Congressman, we know you need to get back to the floor for votes. Thank you so much for joining us, Republican Congressman Blake Moore, Vice Chair of the House Republican Conference. Appreciate your time. And for a comprehensive look at the winners and losers of the current draft tax plan, make sure to go to Bloomberg.com or find our write-up on the terminal. Rich Get Richer, Harvard hit, the winners and losers in the GOP's tax plan.
We turn now to developments overseas as the president touts economic wins abroad. Visiting Qatar on the second day of his big Mideast trip, announcing some deals along the way. Bloomberg's Annmarie Horden has been traveling with the president, joins us now from Doha. Annmarie?
Well, Joe, the president once again, his second stop of this Middle East tour, announcing deal after deal. He clearly sees economic relationships and economic transaction pivotal to his second administration. Here in Doha, the real highlight of the trip of the deals has to be Boeing. We reported a week ago that Qatar Airways was prepared to buy 100 wide-body jets. It could be up to 210 jets. This is really important for Boeing, which you remember the depths of their existential crisis last year. Their brand new CEO has been also on tour with the president on this trip, not just with him here in Doha, but yesterday in Riyadh. So that's really one of the standout, as well as GE Aerospace, the engines for those planes. Qatar Airways was inking a deal. On the defense front, we should note there was a deal with Raytheon. That's important given the context of where we are. The biggest U.S. military installation is here in Doha. This is where U.S. Central Command is. So this really shows the growing importance of the defense sector between Washington and Doha. I would say the trip tomorrow, when the president touches down in Abu Dhabi, we are going to be back to talking about AI technology, because like we saw in Riyadh, we are going to see in Abu Dhabi this thirst from these capitals to get their hands on advanced technology, really a U-turn from the Biden administration's diffusion rule, which put these swing states geopolitically like Saudi Arabia and Qatar under a cap of how many of these high-tech chips they could get. Now it looks like potentially are reporting that NVIDIA may be able to sell 100 million chips into Abu Dhabi over the next few years. That would mean that that's a country like Saudi Arabia, traditional oil and gas, how they exert their influence, make their money, could transform to something very different in the future.
All right, Bloomberg's Annmarie Horden, live in Doha. Thank you so much. And joining us now for more analysis and context on the president's trip and other goings-on places like Capitol Hill, Roger Fisk is with us, former aide to President Obama and Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Our panel joining us early on this Wednesday evening. Thank you for being here. Lisa, when we consider what the president is touting on this trip already, it is hundreds of billions of dollars in investments from these countries that he is walking away with in theory. But does he actually want any more than just the financial commitments here, knowing he was talking about, for example, yesterday, expanding the Abraham Accords? Is that actually the much harder work he still has ahead of him in this region?
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, this is just opening the door to opportunity, and it certainly feels like that's exactly what he wants to say. He wants to be able to demonstrate that he has not only brought in great economic investments, but also opportunities for advancement, opportunities for talks, and all of the other elements. He wants this to be perceived as a great big win for him and for his administration. And so far, it certainly seems like that is the tone and the tenor that's coming out from that.
I'm struck by the contrast of what we would have seen on Joe Biden's trip like this. And we do remember when he paid a visit to Saudi Arabia and was heavily criticized for the fist bump, to show up with an announcement of investments, business deals, as opposed to speaking about diplomacy, historic peace in the region. The way that Joe Biden spoke to this, very different than what we saw today. Is it a new approach for the presidency, or is this just Donald Trump?
Well, both. Thank you for having me. Wonderful to be here with Lisa. With President Biden, you had the Khashoggi situation with the Washington Post reporter, and there was a lot more kind of very distinct, challenging atmospherics about it. I will say that having been on some of these trips and worked on some of these deals, they don't just come about in 2 or 3 months. The chances are very, very high that our foreign commercial service and our embassy and consulate staffs have been working on this for quite a long time. These deals take years. I would imagine that that they have made them a little bit more of made some of the numbers pop a little bit more. And to your specific question about the difference in the presidents, I mean, I've never had a problem on your program or anyone else's saying that this current president knows how to generate really compelling optics. And every president has freed hostages and brought in large investments and cut big trade deals. But he has the skills and the capacity to really, do the promoting elements around it. And that's why they seem like a bigger deal.
Well, of course, as he's touting, for example, the sale of Boeing airplanes to Qatar, everybody else, Lisa, is talking about a very different Boeing, the one he's being gifted by Qatar, or at least the United States is, depending on who you ask. He's been actually playing into that narrative, continuing to double down on why wouldn't he take a free airplane. Does he risk having everything he can accomplish on this trip overshadowed by the questions around grift in that regard?
Ordinarily, yes, the answer would be yes. But it seems to me like it's just all part of exactly what we're seeing all across the board in the administration and how they're operating. Everything seems to be, why would we spend our money on that when someone's willing to give us that? And the truth of it is that that's all part of this narrative that he's leaning into over and over and over again. Everyone else is scratching their head about how in the world could this possibly meet all of the standards that have, there have been gifts in the past that people have had to give back.
Not $400 million.
That's precisely right. But I'm not sure that it's going to overshadow that at all. In fact, I think that it's probably just going to be another part of the story.
You wonder what's really going on here, though. We don't have too much time to dig into this, Roger, but the reports say it will take billions of dollars to upgrade and will take years, and would likely not be finished in time for this president to be flying around on. So what is this about? Pressuring Boeing to make good on the original order?
I mean, to mesh it a little bit with my first answer, it very much plays into the spectacle and the symbolism and the opulence and the wealth. I think of President Bush flying over New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and I imagine the 5 to 8 million people that are going to lose their health coverage in the course of this tax deal, and that at least the president will have this lovely plane to fly over and look down upon them from. These are horrible optics for the frontline Republicans. You could not ask for a worse context within which they're going to be taking votes that are going to cut 5 to 8 million people off health care in communities that are having a tough time to begin with. Rural hospitals in this country, there's a sleeper narrative, and the acceleration of them closing is going to be kicking into high gear should these Medicaid cuts go through.
Well, we'll get more into what cuts Congress is looking at when our political panel joins us again later this hour. Roger Fisk and Lisa Camuso-Miller are with us. Thank you. And up ahead, the brewing fight over birthright citizenship and the authority of judges as the Supreme Court prepares to hear arguments in what could be a landmark case. But up next, more on the president's trip to the Middle East. Jen Gavito, Senior Advisor for the Cohen Group and former Undersecretary of State for Near East Affairs during the first Trump administration, is next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Currently exploring normalizing relations with Syria's new government, as you know. After discussing the situation with Crown Prince Mohammed and President Erdogan of Turkey, I am also ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria to give them a fresh start.
President Trump earlier today in Doha, where he traveled after his brief meeting with Syria's new president, Ahmed Al-Sharaa, in Riyadh. It was the first time each country's respective leaders have met since 2000, when then-President Clinton met with the father of the recently ousted dictator, Bashar al-Assad. The move toward normalizing relations with Syria in the aftermath of the Assad regime's downfall has been encouraged by Saudi Arabia and its Gulf partners as a way for Syria to further distance itself from Iran. And joining us now for more here on Bloomberg TV and Radio is Jen Gavito, Senior Advisor with the Cohen Group and former Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Middle East at the State Department. Welcome to Balance of Power. Jen, when we consider the notion of normalizing relations with Syria, how much harder is that to do than it is to say?
Certainly there are legalities involved in this, and there are a lot of unknowns. That being said, I think we really have to applaud the Trump administration for taking a decision that, by all accounts, has been at odds with what a lot of his advisors have advocated for. That being said, you really do have a historic opportunity right now in Syria. It's an opportunity that is unlikely to last forever. And if you don't allow some oxygen into the economy, then the ability of the new administration, the new regime to provide services and economic development to the citizens, really, that window closes very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so I think this was very much the right decision. The new Syrian president Al-Sharaa has made all the right signals with regard to calling, for example, for relations with Israel. And so I think it's the right move. Whether it succeeds, I think is probably a years-long question, but this is the right start.
What must Benjamin Netanyahu think of all of this, knowing he was already feeling jilted about not getting a visit from President Trump on this trip?
I think that it probably has not been a great week for Prime Minister Netanyahu, whether it is the U.S. deal with the Houthis, this announcement about Syria, or certainly what has to be called a very successful trip by President Trump to the Gulf states. Israel has not been central to any of those discussions. There's been very little conversation about Israel, about normalization, about the Palestinians, or even Gaza, or certainly about Gaza in front of the cameras. And so I think for Prime Minister Netanyahu, this is probably an uncomfortable situation.
And yet the president made clear he does still want to see more normalization of Gulf nations and Israel. He wants Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. What needs to happen before he could see that particular goal realized?
Mohammed bin Salman has been crystal clear on what needs to happen, and that is there has to be a pathway politically for the Palestinians to some sort of statehood. There had been rumors earlier in the week that the United States might be preparing to recognize a Palestinian state. I think that was probably premature. But the situation is actually quite different than it was when those normalization conversations launched prior to October 7th, or almost concluded prior to October 7th. Now I think the Arab Street, as it were, is really clearly on the side of the Palestinians. The the pictures out of Gaza are horrific. And I think that Mohammed bin Salman has been crystal clear, both in front of the cameras again and behind the scenes, that there has to be some sort of pathway to resolution here.
We've made note of the optics of not only the way Donald Trump has comported himself announcing these big deals with each stop, but also FaceTime with Larry Fink, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, all of those executives in the room for that dinner last night. How does that play in Saudi Arabia and throughout the region?
By all accounts, there has been tremendous energy in Riyadh over the last day, in Qatar today. I think the Gulf leaders and President Trump really speak the same language. This is a very transactional set of relationships. These are shared objectives with regard to expanding defense cooperation, empowering Gulf states to take more of a defense burden-sharing role. Whether it is with regard to Iran or otherwise, whether it is expanding, building on their own strategic visions to invest more heavily in cutting-edge technologies. These are concepts and ideas that I think the Trump administration very much shares with the Gulf Arab leaders. And so there's really been a palpable sense, I think, on the ground that the America that they want is back, after a period of time where there were mixed signals, where issues like human rights really played heavily into foreign policy. We're back to a moment where really it's about making deals and expanding investment.
Jen, it's great to have you. Jen Gavito, Senior Advisor with the Cohen Group. We thank you for the insights today on Balance of Power. This morning on Bloomberg Surveillance, Jens Nordvig, CEO, founder of Cmte Data, discussed Bloomberg reports regarding U.S. officials, including currency policy pledge and trade agreements. Take a listen.
We certainly have people within the cabinet, Scott Bessent included, right, that have a different nuance to dollar policy compared to the past. There's always this focus on, okay, how do we insource some manufacturing, and a weaker dollar certainly would be helpful in that regard. Nobody's going to be fighting this trend if the dollar is going gradually weaker.
Here with more to talk about this, Bloomberg's Carter Johnson. Carter, it's great to have you on Balance of Power. Does a weaker dollar help to accelerate the reshoring that President Trump is talking about?
Thanks so much, Joe. Really great to be here. And in short, yes, it does. I mean, the question is always one of degrees and the extent to which the dollar could or could not weaken, to the extent to which a weaker dollar could be engineered by the U.S. administration. And what's really cool in markets is we're sort of seeing traders and investors try to figure that out in real time. So to echo what Jens said this morning, we have had a lot of sort of reactions to what is happening or not happening, what is being discussed or not being discussed in some of these trade negotiations. I think what's clear is we're not certain, or at least markets are not certain, but we are seeing currency markets particularly sort of be the front lines in terms of global investors reacting to these big fundamental policy rethinks.
Well, and when we consider other currency markets and the ability other countries may have to manipulate their own currencies, how does this factor in to the thinking here, Carter? Is it's not just about what the U.S. wants to achieve, but some of these others as well?
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think one interesting thing to note, some folks at Goldman Sachs this morning were talking about it, is they do and probably are more likely to be able to intervene in their own markets, particularly those economies, those currencies with high export shares, et cetera. But they might not want to while these trade negotiations are ongoing. If the Trump administration is sort of out there talking about how a weaker dollar is better for them in their opinion. Well, then, if you're on the other side of those negotiations, that's probably an incentive to maybe let your currency get a little bit stronger. Maybe a few years ago you would have intervened to slow that down, but now not so much. So again, that's not being stated explicitly, but these are all the sort of questions that investors and traders are trying to think through.
Well, it's interesting, Carter. We only have about a minute left. The White House, of course, is going to speak to at least maintaining the strength in the dollar. They're not going to openly talk about weakening the dollar. So who's the audience for the rhetoric?
It's a great question, and you're right, because the White House, the Treasury, they are very much, Treasury Secretary Bessent, very much on the record as saying we have a strong dollar policy. But, it's a good question in terms of who's actually internalizing that. And right now, it seems like traders and investors, they're not. They're basically saying we're going to keep looking at the markets as we are, regardless of what you say. Yeah.
All right, Bloomberg's Carter Johnson joining us from New York. Thank you so much. And still ahead, we'll head back to Capitol Hill, dive into the details of the House Republicans' tax bill. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The SALT piece remains, and that's going to be an ongoing discussion as that moves to the House floor. You have, 5 or 6 specific members from districts that this is a very sticky issue and political issue for them, and they're going to get a chance to work with the Speaker and as we advance this onto, House floor legislation. We got it out of committee last night, and then we're on to the next. You got to find a sweet spot, and hopefully we can do that.
Republican Congressman Blake Moore of Utah here on Balance of Power earlier this hour, providing a progress report on where the tax bill stands in the House and one of the major sticking point issues for some of his colleagues, the state and local tax deduction, specifically the cap on it. And joining us now with more here on Bloomberg TV and radio is Rohit Kumar, principal and co-leader of Washington National Tax Services at PwC. He's also former domestic policy director and deputy chief of staff to Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. Rohit, great to have you back on the program. When we consider the SALT cap being really the one remaining sticking point where there does seem to be some wiggle room within what Republicans are working with here as they try to pursue all of these other cuts, is this the issue that is going to make or break this entire reconciliation package? And is it worth it to the people in these states?
Well, I don't know that this is the issue that makes or breaks the bill. I think it is one of the issues that could make or break, because there are a handful of House Republicans who are, I think, credibly threatening to vote no if they don't get greater satisfaction than what's being proposed by the Ways and Means Committee, the increase of the deduction to $15,000 for individuals and $30,000 if you're married filing jointly, but with an income cap, a phase out that for married couples starts at $400,000 of income. And there's clearly some wiggle room, and I think they are likely to find a solution here. But there are a number of issues that continue to present potential obstacles. The degree of clawback on the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. Some think it's too much. Others think it's not enough. And then, of course, there are the changes to the Medicaid program, which will continue to be a point of political contention, I think, all the way through the process, as that's probably one of the most politically sensitive things that Republicans are attempting to do in this bill.
Well, Rohit, I want you to go back to the upper chamber where you once toiled here in Washington and bring me the view from the Senate, because while there's a lot of self-congratulating going on the committee level in the House today, it's about to get real in the upper chamber. We spoke about this on the early edition of Balance of Power with Bill Hoagland, senior vice president at the Bipartisan Policy Center, what he had to say about what comes next. Listen.
Even if it gets through the House of Representatives, I think your listeners have to understand that we still have the United States Senate. Yeah. And the United States Senate will produce its own bill. And it will be different. It clearly will be different than the House. We're hearing so much from members, some of the more conservative members of the United States Senate that has to take up this bill, who are suggesting that they don't like what's in there. That will also change the real nature of the Senate bill when it comes back to the House.
So this could create some real problems when it goes back to the House. Rohit, you've seen this movie before. Will the Senate have the upper hand at that point, and maybe a debt limit providing even more urgency for the House to accept whatever comes back?
Well, I do think that the debt limit will ultimately be the backstop that, is the action forcing it in. Secretary Bessent has said that we will default on our debt at some point in the month of August. He hasn't said when exactly, but he acknowledged Congress typically takes an August recess, and so they need to do it before that August break began. So the Senate's definitely going to have, I don't know if the last word, but close to the last word, because it looks to me increasingly like the plan here is the House will eventually send this bill to the Senate. The Senate will take it directly to the floor, amend it. But I think this will not be a, to use a congressional term, it won't be a complete jam job. I don't think this is just going to be here's our theory of the case, take it or leave it. Although the Senate does love running that play, and I have been perhaps complicit that in a prior existence. But I think here, what you're likely to see is some attempt to work out, what is it that the Senate can pass, that the House could also pass and send directly to the president's desk, so that it's not going back and forth between the chambers endlessly. Because, look, each of these votes gets harder these will entail a series of compromises, no matter what the issue, whether it's tax or Medicaid or others. Compromises just don't, they don't age well in public. But there's always something to criticize, and the longer you leave it out, the more criticism takes on, the harder it gets to do. So I think there will be an effort, and I think what you might see, and your viewers, I think, should be prepared for this. Even once the House passes the bill, we shouldn't expect the Senate to race to the Senate floor to take it up right away. They'll have to do a little bit of homework, but more importantly, they're going to want to have some conversations with the House to say, okay, if we send you this version back, do you feel you have a reasonable degree of confidence you could send it to the president's desk?
Well, and they have to check in with the parliamentarian as well, Rohit. When we look at the various elements of the bill here, at least as it is in the House, is there any of it that you think won't actually pass muster?
Oh, there's always something in the House passed bill that doesn't pass muster. It is impossible, and this is not the House's fault. They just don't live with this. It is impossible for the House to stick the landing on the Byrd rule, which is the point of order that typically arises, on all the various points of order named after former Senator Byrd that could trigger a 60-vote hurdle. So there is what we literally call a Byrd bath, where you run the bill through the parliamentarian's office, you find out the things that do not pass the test. You either have 60 votes to preserve them, or more likely they get rifle-shotted out of the proposal. So that process takes a little bit of time. But I think equally while they're doing that, they will be having conversations about what modifications do we think, you're never sure until you take it to the floor, but what modifications do we think, if sent over from the Senate, could pass the House? And there are certainly some things the Senate is going to change. We've had Republican senators already start to express, some concern about the level of Inflation Reduction Act and reductions. Some concern that some of the extensions that the House is including, particularly on sort of cost recovery, bonus depreciation, R&D, interest limitation rules, those changes are temporary. They only last 5 years. I think the Senate would like to make those permanent. And, again, Medicaid is probably going to be an object of debate all the way until the final analysis.
We'll meet you at the Byrd bath, Rohit. It's great to have you back. Rohit Kumar, a veteran of the Senate, principal co-leader of Washington National Tax Services at PwC. Thank you, as always. Up ahead on Balance of Power, 2 days of news-making moments in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. What else is in store for the remainder of President Trump's trip to the Middle East? But up next, members of the president's cabinet testifying on the Hill, making some news of their own. We'll get reaction to those hearings from our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. Today, Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Dugan's defense team filed a motion to dismiss the criminal case against her, citing judicial immunity as her defense. That's after prosecutors charged her with concealing an individual to prevent arrest or obstruction when a migrant evaded arrest and was let out through a back door of her courtroom in April, a move authorities say Judge Dugan directed. It's a legal back and forth that has national implications as immigration cases go before judges nationwide. And tonight we find ourselves on the eve of the Supreme Court's oral arguments in that all-important birthright citizenship case tomorrow. For more on that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Greg Stohr, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Greg, what should we be looking out for when these arguments kick off tomorrow?
Well, for starters, the case, even though it affects birthright citizenship, the legal issue is really not birthright citizenship. It's about the power of federal judges. The court is considering whether 3 judges who block these restrictions that the president is trying to put in place nationwide, whether they should have limited their rulings to the parties in the case. If the court says, yes, the judges should have limited the rulings, that will mean that Donald Trump's birthright citizenship restrictions go into effect in much of the country.
We talk about this like it's one of 100 headlines a day, but this is a big deal. Speak to the foundational change this would bring to the country if justices decided to toss this out.
Yes, so foundational actually in both respects. One, it would affect what judges can do, but I think what you're getting at is, really since the 14th Amendment, the understanding has been if you're born on U.S. soil, you are in virtually all circumstances a U.S. citizen. Donald Trump is trying to change that. He's trying to say you have to have a parent who's either a citizen or a green card holder, and that could affect as many as 300,000 people a year. And as you said, foundational change in what it means to be an American.
Bloomberg's Greg Stohr with a lot to look for tomorrow. Thank you, Greg. for setting us up. There were no shortage of fireworks today as members of the president's cabinet sat before congressional committees. Capitol Hill answering intense Q&As amid political firestorms over every issue from transportation, health care, immigration, and more.
Is it doctored or not doctored?
One thing that's important to remember is that every single time a case is built...
Madam Secretary, I have a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. I have a detector. I'm just asking you, is this doctored or not doctored?
Sir, the protocols in the case built against...
Can you answer the question?
...were exactly the same.
Madam Secretary,
I don't have any knowledge as to that photo you're pointing to.
We have not fired, haven't let any one air traffic controller go. You said that we let 400 go. No one in air traffic control has been allowed to take a deferred resignation offer. We have preserved all of our safety critical mission positions, including air traffic controllers.
I don't think people should be taking advice, medical advice from me.
Right, no, I got that. And I'm not asking you to give them medical advice, but would you vaccinate your child for measles?
If I answer that question directly, that it will seem like I'm giving advice to other people, and I don't want to be doing that.
Just a taste. Back with us now for their reaction on Bloomberg TV and radio, our panel, Roger Fisk, former aide to President Obama, Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. So in any other world, each of these hearings would be a lead story and we'd be wringing our hands. But we're looking at the president as he travels the Middle East, announcing tens of billions of dollars in deals on an hourly basis here. Is this the definition of flooding the zone, and is it working?
I think it's working, and I'll tell you why. Roger and I spent a little time before we came back to visit with you looking up some of the reporting that's been happening on what happened on Capitol Hill. And I will tell you that there is almost none just yet. So I do think that there is definitely something that's happening here. I mean, each and every one of them both of them made news today. And the news is not yet hit. Maybe it's on the terminal because the Bloomberg terminal was ahead of everybody else. But I will say this, there is not a lot of information out there. But yes, I do think that that's precisely the direction that this administration is taking, is that when you flood the zone with information and the information is coming from the White House, the rest of the noise really does get sounded out.
Of course, we also should consider the possibility that all the reporters that spend their time running around Capitol Hill are simply just focused on tracking budget reconciliation process in the House and trying to figure out when and if they're going to come to a solution on the SALT cap, right?
There's another slow news week here in the nation's capital. No, when you don't have to wonder what the lead story is, as you guys know far better than me, then a lot of the second and the third tier stories that would normally make it into a half hour or an hour show just don't really matter because there's so much there that's being driven by the president. But the commonality in all three, a little less so with Secretary Duffy, who I think is actually an earnest character trying to actually do his job. My sense of Secretary Noem, who's now saying that we've met the threshold for suspending a very core part of not only the Constitution, but of like Western law that predates this republic. And then for the first time in my life to hear a Secretary of Health and Human Services say that it's not their place to give people advice about health, which if you look back over our lifetimes from tobacco through asthma to, I guess he's willing to give people advice about reducing dye in foods. It's just not, it's not the reflection of a serious, sober policy framework. It's largely performative, and I think that's emblematic of the entire administration.
Well said. All right, Roger and Lisa will be sticking with us as we turn our focus to Capitol Hill more firmly now. Last night on Balance of Power, we spoke with Republican Congresswoman Lisa McClain of Michigan about the tax bill and specifically about the pushback from the SALT caucus. Take a listen.
There is some wiggle room. How much wiggle room, that's what we need to determine. But at the end of the day, I think both sides will come together to get this done for the American people. Because what we'll see if we don't get this tax bill done will be gravely worse than what we're experiencing now with the SALT cap for all Americans.
Let's turn now to one of those caucus members. Republican Congressman Nick LaLota of New York is joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Congressman, welcome back to Balance of Power. Your colleague from New York, Nicole Malliotakis, suggested today that there is discussion around the SALT cap going as high as $80,000 for couples and $40,000 for individuals. Is that your specific demand? And if it is, what will you have to lose in return, potentially on income limits or the duration of that cap lift?
Yeah, so before we get to specifics about where we're going, let's first understand where we came from. In 2017, we passed a tax bill. Washington did. I wasn't here. But Washington passed a very popular tax bill. It was good for Main Street. It was good for Wall Street. Businesses and families and everybody in between liked that 2017 bill. It brought great job growth, low inflation, low unemployment, and great prosperity to America. However, it was funded by a first-time ever cap on the state and local tax deduction. Nearly $1 trillion was taken from the SALT cap and put towards those other incentives. Now, the political dynamics here in 2025 are different. Now, folks like me, my vote is being relied upon to perpetuate and to extend some of these tax cuts, which a lot of my constituents want, but we don't want to pay for it with another low, absurd tax cap on the SALT. We need to fix this issue if we're going to extend these great tax cuts.
So does 4080 fix the issue for you, Congressman?
Yeah, so that's some folks are saying that's on the table. It's not on the table officially. Our meetings are continuous. We have a nice text message group between the Speaker and a few of the saltiest members to try to resolve this issue. We're eager to do so, but we're not going to pay for the rest of the nation's tax cuts like we did 8 years ago. We want to get to yes, but we also want to be treated fairly along the process. Maybe 4080 will be an ultimate proposal. So far, unfortunately, the Ways and Means Committee has not offered us anything anywhere close to that. Sadly, they've been stubborn and not give us anything that we could possibly say yes to. We got to go back home and sell this. And a low 30K cap, when unlimited would come at the end of the year if this bill expires, wouldn't be sufficient for my constituents.
Well, Congressman, we talk about this so much around here. Our viewers and listeners could probably recite to you that $30,000 cap that I know is unacceptable to you and your colleagues in this particular case. But I guess there's a question about what you're willing to give up for it. And I'll get back to Kayleigh's initial question here. Is it income limits, an extension of the tax deduction? What do you put on the table in this conversation?
We're putting a cap in general on the table. SALT comes back unlimited at the end of the year. That we're at the table, even speaking of any cap whatsoever, is a concession to the entire group because our constituents would prefer it comes back as unlimited. So any cap we would agree to is a concession to incentivize the other awesome provisions that are hopefully going to be in this one big, beautiful bill and the Trump tax cut that everybody loved in 2017. We're negotiating good faith. We welcome others to do so along the way. We want to get to yes, but we need to make sure that our constituents, especially our middle-class constituents, places like Long Island, Westchester, Southern California, where Young Kim represents, places in New Jersey where Tom Kean represents, our folks need to be made whole. Each of those states, California, New York, and New Jersey, we're all donor states. We all send way more to Washington in taxes than we get back. We're subsidizing the whole federal government, while states like Missouri get $1.60 back for every dollar it sends to Washington. Louisiana, the home to the Speaker, gets $1.78 back for every dollar it sends to Washington, while New York gets a mere 91 cents. SALT is a way to get more equity, get more fairness, and we have to fix it, as President Trump says.
We all know the clock is ticking here. Of course, Speaker Johnson is looking for a vote by Memorial Day, as he's mentioned. What's the timeline and what's the deadline for making a deal? Is it the Rules Committee meeting next week, say Monday?
Yeah, I've been in this town for 28 months in this job, and it's been my experience in that time that pressure gets us to get results across the finish line. It helps us fund our government, raise the debt ceiling when necessary, and get other important things done. That pressure cooker of this Memorial Day deadline that the Speaker put out there hopefully will motivate everybody to come to the table in good faith and finally fix this SALT issue that was broken in 2017.
Well, and we know there'll be more meetings about that tomorrow. There's rumors that Freedom Caucus members will be involved in those discussions. Congressman, what kind of pushback are you getting from your colleagues, not just on the Ways and Means Committee, but others who are worried about the cost of this?
Yeah, some make the argument that SALT subsidizes the largesse of blue states like mine, and who could want to defend the high taxes and regulations and onerous nature of one-party rule in my state? I'm not here to defend that whatsoever. I hope that my Democrat friends in Albany start to finally change that behavior. But to say that somehow SALT as a subsidy to my constituents is inconsistent with the facts that New York is a donor state. And the other reality that most of my honest colleagues come to is the SALT cap expires at at the end of the year and comes back as unlimited in 2026. So those who say that a 20, 40, 40, 80, 50, 100 or whatever cap is a cost have it backwards. Any cap is a savings. Any cap puts money into the pot to fund lower individual rates, lower business rates, the AMT fix, and all the other provisions that are so popular throughout America. Any cap on SALT provides a savings. It isn't a cost.
Well, Congressman, it's great to have you come by the program this evening. Republican Congressman Nick LaLota of New York, we thank you for the insights as we play it to the panel now for their reaction. Roger Fisk and Lisa Camuso Miller are still with us here. Lisa, who's got the leverage in this argument? Obviously, members like Congressman LaLota are needed to make this happen.
I mean, I'm a Republican from New Jersey, you guys. I mean, there is nothing I want to see more than to make this right, because that is the argument we've been making for years and years, that it's just unfair. And if you look at the map, the political map, the Northeast is still a challenge for the Republican Party. And if they want to get it right, if they want to bring seats back, I know the president wants to see gains in the midterms, getting SALT right would be the right way to go. And it's certainly one that I think that makes a lot of sense. It's those other states that aren't giving back nearly as much as we give in that don't want it to change.
Right.
Well, so do Democrats want to make sure the SALT cap stays low, even though it actually does benefit a lot of Democratic states like New York and California, Roger?
Yeah, I envision a seesaw, and there's the Freedom Caucus on one end, and as they work their way through their list of priorities, the number of SALT state Republicans that have challenging races go up. So there's a direct push and pull there. I want to take one issue with the congressman's thoughts. There's a myth about the first Trump administration, and it involves job creation. Wall Street and the speculative kind of economy did very well. We're here in May of 2019, 2 years after the 2017 tax cuts. The Trump economy created 75,000 jobs in May of 2009. And in February of 2009, the Trump economy created 40,000 jobs. We're about to, for the third time in this century, give away a massive tax cut. There's no data at all that suggests that it produced jobs and economic prosperity when President Bush did it. There's very little data in terms of job creation that the Trump administration did it the first time around. And now we're gonna do this a third time. So what I hope is going to happen, and the representative from Utah, I think, was great on this, about talking about the pushing and the pulling and the need to be flexible in these things, I think is very spot on. And then once it goes over to the Senate and comes back, that is going to be a heck of a conference committee.
Well, boy, that sure is. Having spent time in the House Speaker's office, a different speaker, what do you expect? Because there may not be time for the House to make changes after the Senate does.
Then it's just not going to get done, and we're going to go right back to the drawing. I mean, I just don't see how it's going to. The Senate is ready and poised to make adjustments to whatever comes over to them, and they are going to send a different bill back. And the conference committee, to Roger's point, is going to be wild. It will be a record. It'll just be amazing.
It can be in like an octagon or something. You know?
But the truth is that we still have to get it done. So it's going to be a mess. It's absolutely going to be a mess.
We'll get a sense of this maybe next week in that Rules Committee meeting, just exactly how fraught this debate will be.
Well, that's absolutely true. Knowing the X date is going to be looming, we know Washington loves a deadline, Roger. Is it that threat that actually means that if the Senate sends back a completely different bill, the House might decide to swallow it anyway?
Yeah, well, sure. Both of your guests from the House side referenced very clearly that it often takes pressure and in the form of the calendar, or at least a self-imposed deadline to get some of these things done. So one wonders what maybe shortening the legislative calendar itself would possibly do for some of these things, so that the whole session itself would be on more of an accelerated timeline.
All right, Roger Fisk and Lisa Camuso Miller, our political panel this evening. Thank you so much, keeping us covered from Capitol Hill to the Middle East, where, of course, President Trump will be again tomorrow. He makes tracks to the UAE after his visit to Qatar today, Saudi Arabia yesterday.
Yeah, it's on to Abu Dhabi, and we'll have coverage throughout the day, of course, on the early edition of Balance of Power, and right back here in the meantime. We'll meet you back on Bloomberg TV and radio.